I think LMI has been crucial in where our state is going.
This work resonates with people, and watching LMI grow, it tells me that we're really on to something.
And what we're starting to learn is that there's this combination now about that core of values and character combined with fast, flexible, iterative thinking.
Thank you all for joining us. We're really appreciative of you taking the time to join the California Labor Management Initiative again for another offering. We appreciate all the folks tuning in from across California. We're happy to see people that have registered from Northern California, from Central and Southern California. We appreciate seeing some longtime folks that we've been working with over a number of years, as well as quite a few fresh faces and folks that may be tuning in for the first time. So I'm Ed Honowitz. I'm the Senior Program Director for the California Labor Management Initiative. And again, we really appreciate your time being with us here this afternoon, given the pandemic, fires, the regular insanity of just running school classrooms, school systems, county offices, et cetera. So thank you so much for being with us. And we look forward to a really interesting hour. So as we get rolling, I'd like to bring on my colleague, Gustavo Morales, who's going to join us here in just a moment and give us kind of a run through of Zoom webinar for those that might need a little bit of direction on that. So let's.
Hey everyone, my name is Gustavo, and I'm in the background along with Jesse, my colleague. So if this is your first time joining Zoom webinar, please go ahead and know that there's two ways to engage. The first one is you can use the chat. So if you want to tell us where you're from, give a thumbs up, or just say hello, go ahead and do that in the chat. If you have a question, on the other hand, we invite you to use the Q&A function down below. Hit that Q&A and you can ask a question there. If you see someone else ask the question you wanted to ask, or you really like their question, go ahead and thumbs it up and it'll move it up in the queue. So thanks again for joining us. Jesse and I are going to be here in the background working with the chat and the Q&A, and look forward to hearing Simon. Thanks, Ed.
Thanks, Gustavo. We're glad to have you and Jesse working with us here today, and appreciate all of the folks at the CDE Foundation, our support staff, et cetera. So I want to kind of begin by giving you some context here and a little bit of background. So the California Labor Management Initiative is a project of the CDE Foundation. We work as a nonprofit closely with the California Department of Education, as well as many of your state employee associations and other state agencies, to try and kind of extend capacity to bring in resources to provide a space for the kinds of things that help move education in our state forward. So we'll give you a little bit of kind of information about what we do, and then we'll bring on Simon Breakspear, who we're real excited to have join us from down south, the deep south. In fact, Simon's all the way from Australia coming to us today. So let me give you a little background on the Labor Management Initiative. And since we started in 2015, we've been working with over 160 districts and county offices all over the state. And I think what's unique is we offer kind of a safe space for classified and certificated union leaders, as well as administrators at the site level and the district office level, and board members to come together, to learn together, think together, and share insights to move our systems forward. So I want to start off by showing you an item here. This is what we call our partnership continuum. And this graphic, and I think Jesse will share a link to it in the chat box, but this graphic comes to us actually from the NEA, the National Education Association, and it's kind of a way of thinking about, where people are in terms of labor relations and their interaction from adversarial to cooperative to partnership. And the reason we think this is important is we want people to recognize that, you certainly may not be seeing things the same across all of the folks that are involved. Some people may think you're in a more adversarial space, and while others are thinking this is more cooperative. We also want to make sure that people recognize that you're not stuck in one of these columns. And if we're intentional, if we work together, we can actually move the organizational culture forward across this continuum so that we're working more consistently in kind of a collaborative, cooperative partnership mode. So I want to also call out something, and for those of you that have been with us for a while, you've probably seen something along these lines. This is kind of a collaborative structure, and this comes to us from Patrick Dolan and our friends at the Consortium for Educational Change. This idea of building structures within school systems to support and facilitate collaboration and to help processes of continuous improvement. So some of you may be part of a district learning team if you've been with us, and that is kind of a space where in some cases called, kind of like an extended cabinet for the superintendent, along with the union leadership and in some cases board members as well, to kind of create a space at the top that sets the tone around collaboration and partnership. And then likewise, this idea of building school level teams that might be principals and building reps all the way through grade level teams. So wherever you are currently in your organization, whether you're a classroom teacher, whether you work in a department, you're a classified lead or a superintendent or board member, you have an opportunity and really the ability to help shape district culture, to help shape climate, to really facilitate and empower as a group each other and really make a difference around building continuous improvement processes. This kind of work is really, why we came across and really sort of found the work of Simon Breakspear so interesting, and why it resonated so much with us when we thought about what he was talking about in relation to our work around building collaborative structures and processes within school systems. So why do we do all of this? Well, there's some powerful research that has shown, and this comes from Saul Rubenstein out of Rutgers University. And this is information polling thousands of educators across multiple states in the US. The impacts of collaboration and things like student achievement as measured in standardized tests, as well as the impacts on things like staff turnover. I think the bottom line is, if you feel like you have a voice, if you feel like you're engaged, people are listening, you have agency, you can make an impact in the lives of students and your community, you're more likely to stay and be a player in that system moving things forward. And so, the research is pretty clear. This is also coming out of that research, and it looks at things like, in collaborative systems, there is more staff interaction around helping to share best practices, what's working, innovation. There's more discretion in terms of what staff can do, and more goal alignment up and down the system, as well as more impact around being able to have shared decision making. And likewise, this idea of psychological safety. Do you have the ability to really say, you know what, I've got a better way, I think, of doing this, or I've got some questions about why we're doing it the way we are, or I don't understand this, help me to, be more engaged. That level of psychological safety, these areas of collaboration, I think you'll hear echoed in Simon's discussion of what he's seen in school systems around the world that he's worked in. And then I wanted to share this as well. This comes again from the NEA, and a really excellent piece they put together, a workbook, Collaborating for Student Success, which really talks about the role of the union leaders. And what we see is, in low collaboration settings, union leaders are spending most of their time communicating grievances. And while we know that's a part of the role and it's an important element, what we see is in high collaboration settings, whether that's schools or districts or county offices, the role of the union leader also includes grievances, but includes things like communicating about school improvement, ensuring educator voice in the system, and ensuring that shared decision-making is happening in powerful ways. So one of the things that we've talked a lot about, and this might be familiar if you've been with us before, is this notion of the interaction between trust and improvement. And this graphic comes to us from Andy Hargraves. You may have seen him. He was our keynote speaker in 2019, back in the day when we used to actually gather in large groups without masks and things. And Hargraves really talks about this work being sort of absolutely tied to what is the level of trust within the people in the system, and how is that interacting with how people intentionally work to get better at doing what they're doing to improve outcomes for students and staff. So all of those things were really reasons why when we came across Simon, it really resonated, and what he was talking about was a great match for what we've been talking about. I kind of stumbled across Simon actually in kind of a retweet from Michael Fullen, and started looking into some of his work out in Australia, as well as places around the globe that he's been consulting with, from Canada to a number of continents globally. And particularly liked, and you may have seen this graphic if you were with us during our June virtual summit of his, this idea, that kind of graph of moving on that J curve from crisis through adaptation into opportunity. So we're excited to see that connection with Simon Breakspear's work, and really excited to have him with us today. So without further ado, I'll get out of the way and see if we can bring Simon on to join us here.
Well, thanks so much, Ed, for the welcome. It's great to be joining you.
Well, thank you, and really appreciate your, reaching out, working with us, and being here to kind of impart some insights you've seen in global systems.
Well, Ed, thanks so much for the welcome, and good afternoon, everyone. It's early morning here. Ed and Gustavo thanked me when I jumped online. I think they were a little bit just pleased that I had made it because it's early morning here. I said, don't worry, I've got 3 kids. I've got a 6-year-old, 5-year-old, 2-year-old. I've been up for hours. And I think the first thing you need to know about me, I'm a dad. I'm a former high school science teacher. But a couple of years back, I got really interested in how I could try to use research-based frameworks and tools to better empower teachers and leaders to do their work. And that took me off to do my graduate studies in England. I started getting interested in global education systems, spent some time at the OECD. And then I started to realize that actually, when we think about large system change, what we're really talking about is getting the parameters right to enable district leaders, school level leaders, and teacher level leaders to work collaboratively together to solve the complex problems that they're facing in their local context. And so system change isn't about a chief superintendent or someone else just getting the right drivers in policy. No, it's actually going to be about a lot of those micro changes in those local contexts as people feel empowered with the research, the teams, and the tools that they need to do their work. And that really drives me now. I'm a research fellow at the Gonski Institute of Education at the University of New South Wales, but I'm the worst academic going around. I spend most of my time working directly with schools and with leaders in the field, finding ways to produce tools and resources that help them in their work. And whilst I've been working on complexity and helping leaders work through the human complexity of our work, of course, this year, we're combining all of that human complexity amidst additional uncertainty. And what I'm hoping we could explore in a conversation today is, look, some of the things that I'm learning on the ground here, working with educators from particularly Auckland to Perth in New Zealand and Australia, but then now only by distance in North America as well. Some of the lessons we're learning about leading through uncertainty. I definitely don't have all the answers. And I think what we're all doing at the moment is live sense making. We're trying to do our work. We're trying to progress the things we need to solve. But actually beyond that, we're also trying to sense make and orientate ourselves to where are we in the landscape right now and what are our next best moves. So as someone who does a lot of leadership training for both system, school, and teacher leaders, I can tell you there is no module in any educational leadership master's doctoral program that is about leading your school community, your district, your team through a global pandemic and through the other side. And there really is a sense right now of incredible disruption. One of the things that both those in California and we in Australia have experienced is this sense of no one could have ever predicted these things. Now, we've both experienced really serious challenges, both in the pandemic and also in natural disasters. Here in Australia, we're always in the future. Right now, I'm already in Friday. Sorry to rub that in, but I've only got about 8 hours left in my week. But one of the things we experienced before you this year was this incredible impact of the bushfires. and the way that changed our summer, the way, as I was speaking with Jessica earlier, about having 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds and 2-year-olds stuck in the house during the hot months where you're normally out. And so we've sort of already entered in February, coming out of what I'd call crisis recovery. And here in New South Wales, our school leaders were trying to find a way of course, keeping everyone safe. And then as quickly as possible, once it was safe around the fires, getting people back to normal. We had a crisis center set up here in New South Wales, and we had people in our education department who were leading that response. But one of the things that's really interesting, I think, is that actually, once we just got through that and we went through that crisis and then into the recovery, of course, by March, we were starting to experience the impacts like the rest of the world about the global pandemic and asking pretty serious questions about how do we make and take actions to keep our students and our staff safe, whilst of course also trying to pursue our goals around equity in public education. If I sort of give you a brief insight about what it's been like here down under, our two largest states of New South Wales and Victoria, we both locked down like most of the rest of the world during April and May. And yet in New South Wales, we were able to come back, and my little 6-year-old's been back at school for a couple of months. And yet in Victoria, after coming out of restrictions and being able to go back to school, suddenly they were then forced back in to restrictions with state border closures and others. And I raise this because as I've been working with leaders in both those states, we started to realize that originally we thought the response to the pandemic was going to be much like that to the fires, which was to keep everyone safe, see through the crisis, and then quickly snap back and recover to what we had before. And yet in this context, what we're starting to realize is that there is no easy snap back. The response to this can't just be crisis recovery, because actually we're needing to build the adaptive capability as teams and as systems to often switch back and forth, that on any day now, certain schools are closing and then reopening, certain things are adjusting over time. And so we're actually being forced to do deep transformation about different ways of working and learning together. So I want to say, obviously everything that we're experiencing right now is creating serious disruptions to the ways that we were working. But also, my friend Valerie Hannon from the Innovation Unit in England helped me understand that pandemics aren't just about disruption, they also reveal things. They reveal things about our system. About 30 minutes from where I live in Sydney, I'm pretty close to Bondi Beach, if that's a beach that you know from TV shows. But just up on the northern part of Sydney, there's just endless beaches. It's a pretty great place to be, just like in many parts of California. And there's this great rock platform. And when I was a high school science teacher, I used to take my students out there. And if you got it at the right time in a low tide, all this water just comes back and it reveals the incredible life underneath. And I think one of the things this pandemic has done in our education systems is not just disrupt, it's also played a revealing function. That we're now better able to understand the extent of inequity in our system. We're better able to understand, perhaps, as Ed was talking about, the level of collaboration and trust that was really there. There's a whole range of things that, if you like, as the water has gone out, we're starting to better understand what was there and perhaps look upon our systems and our organizations with fresh light. A couple of times that I would love to, as we would in any kind of interaction, kind of get a sense with what's going on for you. And one of the things I'm interested in is learning, as you think about leadership during these times of uncertainty, what are you learning about what is most essential for effective leadership during times of extreme uncertainty? If I was to kick off, I think one of the things that I'm learning is the importance of values-based decision-making. When everything is moving so quickly, we need to be really clear about our set of values and using those internally and consistently to make the next best and right move. But what are some of the things that you're learning? Glennon Stratton says clear vision with compassionate flexibility. What a great turn of phrase. Thank you for sharing that. What about other people? What are you learning about effective leadership in conditions of extreme uncertainty? What do we need from our leaders? Inclusive-based decision-making, humility and grace, transparency, a lot, compassion, consistency of communication, even as change happens. Keep them coming. These are great. Would love to hear from as many as possible. Michael's saying rapid iterative learning. Glenn's talking about grace, and Jessica, openness to new ideas. Ed's saying clarity around the haves and have-nots in the system, equity of access, voice, and opportunity. I want to say that we are learning a lot of lessons in this. And what I think is really interesting from my perspective, actually, is that a lot of people, and the answers here I'm seeing are very similar, is this strange combination, I think, of actually the depth of what's mattered to leadership for millennia: humility, grace, transparency, character, values. Increasingly, these are the things that are the bedrock of this work. And yet it's combining that with a lot of newer thinking, like rapid iterative cycles, getting into the work, openness, reduction of hierarchies. And what we're starting to learn is that there's this combination now, which seems to be required now in this leadership, which is absolutely about that core of values and character combined with fast, flexible, iterative thinking. Obviously, you don't want the latter without the former, but the former can't actually achieve its outcomes in this context without the latter. And so I want to explore together a couple of these ideas about leading in our communities, collaborating and teamwork in our communities. And I just want to share a couple of frameworks that I've been finding useful as frames for thinking. And I understand those who are on the labor side and in organizations, those who are in district leadership, those who are in school leadership, these might play out for you in different ways. But I want to just offer you a couple of frameworks and see whether these might be of service to the work that you're thinking through at the moment in California. So the first framework I want to suggest is that here in Australia, when we first went through the bushfire, we went crisis and then recovery. And it was very normal for us to talk about in our school systems, can we get back to business as usual or schooling as usual? We were longing to get our kids back into buildings, safe and learning. And so it was actually about organizational recovery and snapback. Let's get back to where we were. But I want to suggest that the appropriate response to what we're all moving through in COVID is probably a bit different. And in fact, given the extreme adaptation and pressures that we've been under and the new innovations that are emerging, actually it would dishonor the front line and everything that our educators and leaders have been through to just snap back to ways of working. And for those of us who are working on the labor part of the shop and working in partnership with districts, I'm hoping that as well you've experienced some new and different ways of working, which is making you think through organizational learning and renewal, not just snapback. But hopefully if the numbers stabilize in California, hopefully if over the coming months you're able to find ways forward, I want to suggest that it is possible, even though it feels perhaps that what you've been through has been so profound, how could things snap back to the way things were? And I want to say it would be normal for humans to come out of this extreme period of intensity, where they've experienced pressure and heat, where they've had new adaptations, where you've seen new behaviors and beliefs and practices and ways of working emerge because we've had to do that. I want to say that it's actually quite normal for humans, after moving through all of that, to experience a point of snapback. That actually the way that people often respond, the way that people often move through some of these challenges and out on the other side is actually to return to the things that were defaults before. But can you let me know in your place and in your work, what are some of the ways that you're starting to see shifts occur? What are some of the things that you're seeing? You know, is it around digital ways of learning? Maybe it's agile ways of working, empowering students and family as co-partners in the work. Maybe it's around building relational capital. I had someone say before that their communities, Lisa said, communities are stronger than we think. And maybe saying, well, actually, there's been some real opening up and strengthening of some of the work. Give you another moment to give me a quick vote here. So no doubt and no surprises around some of those digital transformations, but also some of these agile ways of working as the adults in the room, the way we meet, the way we're sharing, the way we're working through more iterative planning cycles, the empowerment of students and families as more active partners in work, and maybe building that relational trust. So it's worth asking, what different and better ways of working together have emerged that we want to sustain? And it's crucial to ask this question early and often. And I want to say leadership at the teacher team level, school team level, district team level, and all other levels in organizations, even in the context of still innovating and adapting to the challenges that you're facing, it's going to be crucial to keep asking, what is it that's emerged that's worthy of keeping into whatever is the new normal? Because when people are tired, and they are, when you move through, as some of our states have moved through, coming out of lockdown and then actually being asked to go back in, there is a level of cognitive and emotional exhaustion that comes together. And interestingly, when humans are that tired, they often revert to the defaults. That there is a sense in recovery that even if things were profound, we can quickly snap back to the default ways of working, the default ways of partnering, the default ways of communicating. I don't know about you, but there were certain things that during a period of isolation and physical isolation as a young family that we actually, to be honest, quite enjoyed, at least in the early phases. Can you let me know in the chat bar if there was anything that during a period where you actually had to slow up and you weren't able to necessarily move as much from your home, were there any silver linings for you individually or as a family? What are some of the things that you really enjoyed or that you enjoyed returning to? Can you let me know into the chat bar here? Quality time and saying daily mass, keep it coming. More family time. Yeah, that was definitely for me as someone who's on the road in schools all the time. More time with family, working more in my garden, slower pace cooking. I love it. Quality time, dinner at 7 p.m. every night because no extracurriculum activities. New ways to stay entertained. No commute, walking, moving, all the time I hear these things. People getting out, Jessica saying new hobbies. Okay, what's the new hobby? Let me know. Dinner together. There's these things where people, busy educators like you, are saying, I moved my body more. I ate better. I had time with my own kids, not just everyone else's kids. We had some routines and rhythms as family. And one of the things I just want to say is that what often happened during that time is people said, this was profound. I like my life in these elements at least better. And yet as things open up, what I've typically found in talking to people is they revert back to how they were eating before, that they don't prioritize that walking anymore, that their family dinner times are disrupted again. You might say, well, that of course is, expected. I want to say there are dangers here if you acknowledge that actually even very profound experiences, things that you were telling other people about, this is profound, I like this better, I've rediscovered this, most of us find that we snap back again. And I want to say in our organizational lives, in our partnering work, in our teams, it's important to actually be really clear together, where is it that we do not want to snap back? One of the most important questions I'm asking teams and organizations is, what would be on your do not let back in list? That is, if you get a return to some sort of new normal, what would you say is on your do not let back in list with regards to how your team works, how communication occurs? I say one of the things that I hear most is actually about how we meet together and communicate together in our organizations. Can you share in the chat bar for me, what would you put on your do not let back in list with regards to organizational life and ways of working? Things that you say, look, whenever we return to some sort of form of new normal, I don't think we should have those elements. Hillary, I was waiting for that long in-person meetings. Lee saying all the use of paper, work overwhelmed family time, social media, keep them coming. And I think it's worth sort of talking about, you know, we're going to remember 2020 for the rest of our lives. And the danger is that we still snap back to the old defaults. We snap back in our personal lives, we snap back in our teams, and we snap back in potentially our relationships between school districts and labor. How do we rethink and learn the lessons so that we're actually moving into an organizational learning and renewal period rather than a recovery and snapback? So a really simple frame that you might find useful as you think about your school teams, teacher teams, district teams, organizational teams is a frame around organizational learning that I've been using in various places. And it's just really simple to remember. Capture, cleanse, weave. And I'm going to suggest during this time, when there's so much going on, and you're still absolutely in a period of adaptation, that you don't have to make profound decisions necessarily as a school or as a district, as an organization about what you're going to do. But we need to find ways to capture the new innovations and ways of working that are occurring. We then, at some point, and maybe this isn't until October or November for you, we need to set aside some time to make some decisions to do what I call the cleanse, to come together as a team, or perhaps that team involves people across organizations, and ask questions around what are the new ways of working that we want to sustain into a new normal? Where do we want to avoid a snapback? And then lastly, what I call the weave. That possibly November, December, and into 2021, organizationally, we're going to have to work together to weave those new ways of working into our new normal such that they become the new defaults. So let me give you a couple of just headlines. And I know that because we're coming in from lots of different organizational contexts, you'll have to apply these in different ways. But the first thing I'm learning is to stop being stressed about having to make profound decisions about the future. No, all you need to do right now is capture. Record the collective experience through rapid documentation. Find ways to capture what's occurring in the field. Sometimes this capturing might be about capturing the experience of teachers, for example. And one of the really simple ways that I've done that capture for those of you who are working in schools and districts is a very simple Google Doc innovation capture. I'm just going to dump this into the chat bar in case you wanted to use this and adapt it for your own context. But what I've been doing is realizing most staff do not want to do a survey. They see another survey and they think, oh no, not another one. And so if I share here, you know, just this brief document, what I've been doing is putting a 20-minute timer on during a staff meeting, even when people are co-located. And you can do this, of course, the first part here is about emerging ways of working together. And I just ask people live, everyone in the same doc coming in anonymously, hey, what have you done in planning and collaboration? What have you been doing in professional learning development? What new roles, responsibilities, and leadership structures are emerging? What real-time problem solving and sharing of materials have you started to see? And what's in your do not let back in list? I can do this in 10, 15, 20 minutes live, people co-located or remote. Because it's anonymous, I often get a rapid uptake of people sharing what's occurring for their team. The second part is particularly around teaching and learning. I'm sure Jessica and the team will send all of these out to you later on by email with my slides, by the way. Of course, you can access all of those if you're interested. And here I do live with teaching practitioners and ask them, what platforms are you using? What approaches to assessment and feedback? What are you learning about enhancing student motivation and effort when you're at a distance? What have you come to learn about that because you can't do it in the normal ways that you've been able to do before? For which students did remote learning cultivate improvements? We've got to look for those bright spots whilst of course focusing on the deep challenges of equity. So I think we need to find ways to capture. For some of us, that capture might be in a survey. For some of it might be interviewing. But we need to find a time now to explore the new ways that have emerged and continue to emerge as you move into the start of a new school year. And I think it can be really powerful to just explore together, even just in the team that you work with, where are we starting to see shifts? Don't have to decide on what we're keeping, but where have we seen shifts in our teamwork for beliefs, norms and values, behaviors and practices, in the use of various technology platforms? What about in the processes that we use? The reallocation of time and structure. One of the things that drives school districts and schools is just how strict the structures and time are. And we need that to keep everything going. But we've done this incredible natural experiment, replaying around structures and times, and even roles and responsibilities and leadership. We should capture some of those things. And knowing that all you have to do is capture rather than necessarily decide can be quite liberating. And then at some point, and you'll know in your team, in your context, it's time to move into what I call the cleanse, which is of all the new stuff that's emerged, some of it's only fit for the time that we were in. But there's some things that have emerged where we should explore together as teams, particularly across partnerships, and say, what are the ways that we were working together that we want to sustain? We want to sustain this going forward. And it's a period of sense making, exploring what are some of those things that have emerged and which ones do we want to take into the future. I've done this in all sorts of different ways with teams. One of the simplest ways I use is I just get some different sized cards, literally small, medium, large, and I get people to write out some of the changes in pen. You can do this on Google Jamboard or Miro or some of the other online whiteboards if you want. And I write out all the shifts that are occurring at a staff level. It might be online parent-teacher interviews. It could be changes in the way that we have our meetings. For others, it might be about how we do stakeholder engagement. And we draw those out. A small card means a small change, a medium card, a medium change, a large card is, hey, this was a big change. It would take a lot to sustain. And we talk about them and we get them out, and then we can vote around the ones as a team or as an organization we'd want to take forward. And then lastly, I want to suggest that the coming 6 to 12 months is about the weave. And that is about realizing that there could be new ways of working, but we need to systematically draw into the work that we're doing as an organization. That we need to find ways to sustain new behaviors in our old organizational context. They can be about our internal organizational life, but they could also be about our partnership across organizations, the way that we do communication, the way that we solve problems. Are we going to have a reversion back to the way things were? Or can we systematically and deliberately weave some new approaches in the way forward? Finding ways for these new behaviors and beliefs to actually take root and to become a new normal. So I wonder whether this framework might be of use to you, that in the busyness right now, you shouldn't feel as though you've got to make all the profound decisions about what this means for the future of your organizational life. But you should make sure during September and October that you do some capture, that at some point you have a time for a cleanse and you see the coming 6 to 12 months as an opportunity for weaving those new ways of working and thinking together. So let me know in the chat bar if you think that framework could be a useful way of approaching the organizational learning and renewal that you might do as a team, as a district, or as a partnership over time. So the second area I wanted to share with you this morning is I wanted to, well, so it was this morning my time, and for you obviously in the afternoon, is share with you a little bit perhaps about where we are as organizations and teams, the types of problems that clearly we're all trying to solve, and therefore what types of ways of working might be best suited for the types of challenges we're facing. So one really helpful framework that came out from David Snowden for a while ago, and you can look this up as a HBR article, a Harvard Business Review article, Leaders Framework for Decision Making, the Sinophen framework. And the Sinophen evidently means habitat in Welsh, so that's where that term comes from. But one of the things it's worthwhile doing as teams and as leaders is to ask, what types of problems are we trying to solve right now? And there are some things, only a small number of things in education, which he would put into the obvious category. Tightly constrained, no degrees of freedom. We just need to know the best practice and do it. You know, simple, clear, obvious, clear domain where we have known knowns. And there's some parts of our work that fit there. There's some parts of our work that are much more in the complicated domain. That is, there's known unknowns, and we have to kind of work it through together, a little bit like a Rubik's Cube or a crossword puzzle. There's known unknowns, and we just have to take the time to get the planning right together. But interestingly, I think what's occurring at the moment is almost all of the challenges that we're facing are on this side of the shop. They're mostly in the complex and even potentially what's going on right now for California into the chaotic. And by that, I'm talking about the domain of problem solving, either involving the unknown unknowns, that is, you're trying to act without knowing all the elements. Or even you might be saying that cause and effect are unclear and are less predictable, at least, than they used to be. And if you're in this part of the world, if you are trying to answer problems educationally that are complex and even chaotic, they require a different way of thinking and a different way of problem solving together. One part of my work has been around a network of schools involving multiple thousands of leaders that we call agile schools, and we look at taking an agile approach to leadership. And we've done that because actually what we've learned is whether you're facing the normal human complexity of educational change, or whether you're trying to respond to the growing uncertainty that's occurring now, basically your only hope is to increase leadership team agility. That we need to find ways, not to spend a lot of time finding the perfect answer and then delivering that answer into our organizational system with fidelity. No, increasingly, we need a solution-finding approach as teams that is going to allow us to navigate complexity, adjust as we go, and learn our way into the improvement that we want. So in my work, what I've been doing in education is drawing on agile ways of working that have mostly come out of the software industry, and also improvement science that's come out of healthcare and industry and quality assurance practices. And the Carnegie Foundation for the Enhancement of Teaching, of course, in California, led up until recently by Tony Bright, has been a real leader in that improvement science approach. What I've been doing is drawing on some of those approaches and saying, how do we help educational teams solve complex problems amid this uncertainty? And I just want to share four things. Four things is the kind of last frame that I'd like to get into before we maybe look at some questions and have some dialogue. Four things that I see as shifts in the ways of working that are necessary in order to navigate this complexity, in order to find ways forward, even when the answers aren't all that clear. So the first thing that I'm learning is the need for us as teams and as partnerships to really go after sharp and clear thinking with the absence of edgy buzzwords and trying to get our thinking as crystal clear as possible. That as we're starting to act in complex systems, we need greater precision in our language, and we need to, at even a higher level, get very clear about what specifically we are trying to do. I find that some of the best ways of doing this is to get into very, very simple theories of action. Now, hey, maybe it's just simple Simon here and I can't handle the complexity of a long theory of action or logic model. But when I'm working with teams right now, what I'm often doing is once they define a problem they're trying to solve, I only get them to come up with these simple answers, and this is it. Once we define the problem, we talk to each other and we say, let's think about the actions we're going to take. And so we say, if we do ... what are the actions we're thinking about taking? And then we say, well, what's the pathway? What would we expect to start to see in about 4 weeks? It gets us ready to predict, to think about where we're heading. And then a little later, we should see this. Now, you can do this over any temporal horizon. You can change those weeks. But one of the things I'm going to suggest right now is it's crucial to get our thinking down on a simple page so we have a shared understanding of what we're trying to do and what we expect to see. And here's why that's crucial. If we want to learn our way into improvement together, we need to not only be crystal clear about the theory of action, what we're doing, but also predict what we expect to see. Here's why that's important. As a former science teacher, I want to suggest that we need to make a hypothesis and then get into that complex scenario and to see whether or not that hypothesis actually plays out in the real world. If we do see positive evidence that we're on track, great, let's keep going, let's persevere. But if we don't, in those early phases, those first 4 weeks, see early evidence that we might be on track, we have to, as teams, be willing to come back and not have any sense of blameworthy failure. No, not at all. We're working in complexity. It's actually praiseworthy failure. That is, we had a good bet, we got into the work. Early on, we're not seeing the responses that we wanted to see. So now how we can learn our way into our next iteration of the work. I'm finding during these times, and particularly partnerships across teams, you can use a simple tool like my impact canvas that I've just dropped in. And this simple tool, get it down on a page, and we can say together, particularly if you're working, labor and school districts coming together in and around a strategy for keeping teachers safe or keeping students safe or responding to something. It's like, okay, here's the project we're talking about. Do we have agreement? Here are our improvement strategies. And then what do we expect to see? And then what do we expect to see a bit later? If we can get clarity around that one page, elegant simplicity, we can be really empowered to do this type of work. Remember, direction is more important than speed, getting crystal clear about what we're trying to do. Second thing I want to say today, and it's already come up in the chat bar and I appreciate it, is that we can learn from agile approaches and improvement science that if you're in complex settings, you can't know the answer before you start. This means we have to be willing to get into these cycles of test and learn. Early test and learn cycles are going to be what I call incubation cycles, working with a few quickly and cheaply. And then later on, amplifying cycles where we're trying to refine the idea over time. But this takes some difference in the ways of working because, so often there can be tension because we expect the other people to get it right first time. But if you're working in complex settings, you just can't expect people to always get it right first time. And we have to have a grace amongst this work where we say to each other, if you've got a clear understanding of the problem and we act with good intentions, and wherever possible, we work in small cycles, we're going to go looking for those early signs of progress, but also without judgment, we're going to look for the evidence that things might not be on track. Okay, and this is crucial. In Australia, I don't know whether you have these. Let me know what you call these in America. And I'm sorry if you don't call them. We call these rumble strips down the road. And if you're driving along and not paying attention, you kind of head towards the side of the road and you hear this boom, 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 boom. Can someone just let me know in the chat bar, what are they called? I need to work on my American here. And I want to say in the work together, in partnership, we should say, well, what are the early buds we're looking for? But also, hey, what are the rumble strips? What are the things that we should know? Hey, that's great, Jessica. Look at this. Absolutely clear communication here across a very large Pacific Ocean. So one of the things though, sorry, wrong side of the road for you guys. But one of the things here is I want to say we have to be okay with each other of setting those rumble strips and not saying, oh, you got it wrong. A gotcha moment. Now, when you're working in complexity, you will get things wrong. And the question is, will you learn early or will you learn late? And what we often do is we let things run for too long. What we need to do is to say, we're going to make mistakes because this is complex, but what we commit to doing is clear communication, and every week we'll make better mistakes than the week before. And I think that absolutely has to be the benchmark. That has to be the benchmark. But if we get into gotcha moments, if we get into this kind of way of relating, and particularly in partnerships across organizations, whereby we say, you got it wrong, we say, well, if you get it wrong in a simple space, then, that's blameworthy failure. If you get it wrong with good intentions in a complex space and you learn from it and you adjust it, that's praiseworthy failure. Two other things I think we're learning about this space is shifts in effective communication, that the communication needs to be regular, constant. One of my friends is a former education minister here, and when he was education minister, he had a great relationship with the unions. He was actually in the right of government, although our right of government here is about your centre left. And he said to the union leader, we may not always agree, but I'll never surprise you. And what that meant is that the union leader knew that he would never learn about something in the papers. He'd never make an announcement. He'd always make the call. have a conversation. And I love this idea of that constant effective communication where we're going to have to debate things out early and often, agree where we need to change course, and be willing to really absolutely adjust things as we go. And the last thing, and I want to open up some times for questions here, Gustavo. So let me just do this last one. And it speaks to one of your frameworks, which really thought was a terrific framework. And one of the things we know about effective communication and being able to work things through like this is this need for psychological safety. It comes out of the work of Amy Edmondson from Harvard. She'd studied psychological safety in multiple areas, but there is this idea in partnership. We have to say to each other, it's okay to take some of the interpersonal risks needed to learn together. We really need to be able to say to each other, look, there is psychological safety in this team. You can make praiseworthy mistakes. You can speak up if something's outside of your current repertoire of expertise. And I think if you combine these areas together, colleagues, this idea of being really sharp about what we're trying to do, working in rapid cycles, opening up regular and constant communication so we get that information flow, and committing to building actively that psychological safety, I think for me, that is really the platform to develop team and organizational agility over time. And I think from my side, that's what we in education are learning to do right now, that we are actually learning new and different approaches to teaming together, communicating together, solving complex problems together. And it's going to take a bit of time. And we're going to have to focus on team health and check in about how we're going together, both internal teams and cross-organizational teams. But from my side, I think, well, given everything we've been through, then one of the real silver linings of all of this would be to come out on the other side with more agile organizations in education that are able to adapt to future uncertainty as well. So with that, Gustavo, I might hand over to you to maybe either take some points out of the Q&A or chat, or invite people now to come in and share some of their own responses and questions for the day. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thanks, Simon. So we're going to keep you up here for a little bit. I have a question. So I invite everyone to put any Q&As into the chat box below the video here. But one of the things we've seen, Simon, is that we've seen people step up that haven't usually stepped up. Right? We've seen the classified staff, the custodian, the cafeteria manager, the office manager really step up in a real way. And one thing we've heard is, how do we get them to be adaptable and agile? How do we teach this adaptability and agility, especially when they're joining groups that they've never been in before, really making decisions along with schools and district teams? So how do we teach that adaptability and agility to others and maybe new leaders?
Great. Well, you know, one of the things that I often find, Gustavo, is people talk about mindset all the time. And the only problem with that mindset type way of attacking this is that we start to think about there's something internally about the way that they see the world that needs to shift. And if they would just switch over, then they would be able to be this. But what I find normally is people behave into new mindsets. And so what I'm really interested in is not kind of thinking about, you know, how does this person become more adaptive or agile in their mindset necessarily, but how do I as a leader set these things? So how do I incorporate routines into their ways of working that are inherently agile? So the best one for me is action planning and stand-up meetings. That those people come in and around, like you see IT professionals, they come in and they stand up, obviously at 1.5 meters apart or over a Zoom call. And they get really used to being incorporated into a stand-up meeting, which is, what have you progressed? Where are you stuck? And what's your best next move? And that's about this idea of reprioritizing collectively and having that sense of, well, I've moved my bit. Well, there's a problem over there. And that idea of I'm part of this collective, rather than what normally happens in the hierarchy is they have a set of tasks to do and they have freedom just to go and do that. So I think action plans, stand-up routines, running retrospectives when things go wrong. Let's run a quick retrospective on that and learn from it. I would say having tools, so things like that impact canvas. I know it's simple, but hey, let's get that thinking down on a page. Let's open that up into scrutiny. What is another way we could approach that over time? And then the last thing I'd say, it's a simple one, but I think agility is difficult to teach, but it's easy to model. And so I normally think, one of the things you want to try to model it out in the way you respond as a leader of that team to challenges, the way you respond to things not going well, the way that you're very open around, okay, I'm entering an area outside of my expertise. We're going to have to learn our way into this. I think some of that modeling is going to be crucial as well. But I normally say you want to change behavior, change tools and routines.
Excellent. So we have time for about one more question. I see Michael submitted one. Can you see it there, Simon?
Yeah, let me just bring that up.
So what are your lessons learned about paring back? It seems that many, especially in the public education, are reluctant or scared to let go of or abandon things. What accelerates sustainable paring or pruning?
Yeah, nice. So there's a couple of different areas here. Obviously, pruning and things around curriculum and assessment is quite difficult, and then all the way through to pruning around how the adults work and learn together. So I often would start with areas where you have direct control and influence. And so particularly around how adults meet, how they engage with families, and how they do their professional learning. They, to me, are a more fertile ground for that work. One of the easiest ways to pair is to not let it come back in. So rather than letting it revert and then trying to get rid of it, there might be certain things that have been stopped during COVID that as leaders, wherever possible, we have to just not let it restart, because that's much easier than letting it restart and then going through the kind of institutional loss of stopping something. So I definitely think that's one of the pieces. And then with all of this, it's a return to our values. I actually think that returning to some of our core values, say around equity, returning to our core intents for our young people in our communities, we have to bring those right at the fore, and then we use those and say, well, of all these things, which ones are still ultimately serving that end, and which ones actually aren't really contributing towards that end? And that's a more helpful discussion, and we get out of things whereby certain adults in the room, that program or that thing, that's their baby, that's the thing that they're running. And we don't want to make it personal. We actually want to have it about a return to the best ways to achieve our moral imperative, particularly around equity. So there's some of the things that I'd be thinking about.
Awesome. Thank you, Simon. Thank you so much for joining us here. And thank you to everybody for joining the chat and joining us in the Q&A. So before we go, we have a few questions for you. So if you can join us in the last poll, and I'm going to pull it up here. So I'm going to ask for a little bit of feedback. So if you can please answer these 6 short questions. We're going to do our best, Ed and I, really to bring back more speakers like Simon, and maybe even Simon back.
So please go ahead and kind of answer as you go. The feedback is really helpful for us. We try and design our systems to be in response to what we're hearing from all of you. And so we really appreciate you taking the time to give us your feedback and insight. And, I think as we think about all that Simon has been talking about, it's important to recognize that, these are complex systems. These are absolutely kind of, uncharted territories. And we have all kinds of things like the power dynamics that are going on within our schools and our systems, and who has agency and who doesn't. And, that plays out across both staff and with students and parents and community. So, I think much of what Simon brought to us here today is, applicable both within our school organizations, but also as we think about the interactions with parents, with children, etc. And I want to thank Simon for joining us from Australia and bringing us your insight. I know we just barely scraped the surface here, touched on a little bit of what you've been doing around building agile teams, building kind of agency within school teams and systems. And at the end of the day, this really is about how do we empower everyone in the system, every employee to kind of bring their creativity and insight to bear to help improve systems for us. Just as we close out, wanted to let you know that, there's more opportunities to engage with the CDE Foundation, with the California Labor Management Initiative. And We wanted to point out one thing. There's a QR code next to that little picture with me in it. That's the funny box there. If you take your phone and take a picture of that QR code now, that'll be a link into our video library. And you'll see a variety of things, both video from our virtual summit. There's a video actually of Simon's presentation there, which was on a slightly different topic, but related, as well as a variety of things that can help support your work in school districts, in schools, and across the state. And again, we know that everybody is extraordinarily busy at this point in time. We really appreciate you joining us. I just want to again give a shout out to Gustavo, Jesse, the whole CDE team. Simon, thank you so much for joining us. If you want to reach out to myself, to Gustavo, around how we might be able to support your work in your school system, our contact information is there, and please reach out, be in touch. We're there to help you manage through these challenging times and to be a part of helping us all sort of find the way forward. So again, Simon, thanks so much for joining you. We'll be in touch, and appreciate everyone spending their afternoon with us. We look forward to connecting with you soon. Thank you.